All right. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of this strange podcasty type thingy that changes randomly as the things happen. Um, I'd like to start off the podcasty thingy today by thanking my Elias Thompson for subscribing um, and giving himself inspiration. Um,
Thanks, Elias Thompson.
I've heard of that guy before. Not sure where
yes,
though.
so have I. So anyway, this is my strange podcasty type show thing. That on YouTube is called Roll on the Table because I really enjoy puns. But broadcasting live, it is literally whatever we decide to call it that particular night. Um, with me today are three amazing people who have decided to share their thoughts on a variety of tabletop related topics. Starting with the gentleman right below me, who is going to be sitting in our DM chair for the night, is Michael. Michael, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi there. My name is Michael Gibson. I am the DM guest this evening, as Jody said. I've been playing tabletop games for most of my life. I've been playing D&D since probably 6th or 7th grade. And during all of this bizarre reality we found ourselves in, I've actually started running games professionally, digitally for a handful of groups all over the world. I've got a couple players in the Netherlands and Britain, all over the United States. And I'm really thrilled to be here to chat with some other nerds as we try to unpack like this bizarre hobby that we've all found ourselves in for one reason or another. If you'd like to find me on social or anything, you can find me on Twitter at YesThatMGibson, YesThatMichaelGibson. And on most other platforms, I'm the same user there as well. Would you like me to give like a fun fact or something? Or
That works perfectly.
Sweet.
To my that way, directions are weird when things are mirrored. Is the fantastic Blair Beveridge, who's going to be sitting in our player chair today. But Blair, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Blair Beveridge. As you see on the screen behind me, spelled a little differently. That is in fact my last name. I'm actually a relatively new player. I picked the game up 4 years ago. First game I ever played was in San Diego Comic-Con, when I was able to get together with a lot of my friends, one of which is here today. And
we're not for friends.
Not friend, no. With the guest yet to be introduced. But no, it's just a brand new thing for me. I tried it in my 20s. Well, I didn't try D&D specifically. I tried a Star Wars RPG, and I had a bad experience. It had nothing to do with the gentleman who was trying to run the game for me, and I just kind of backed away from it for a while. I've been playing RPG video games though for my whole life, and they were some of my favorite games. And once 5e came out and the focus more was on storytelling, I think that's really what drew me in, and I think what draws a lot of people in these days. So I'm a Canadian. I'm up here in Vancouver, British Columbia, and happy to be a guest.
Fantastic. And then probably I think you are my oldest friend online, as in the longest of a friend online. And the person I have done the most things with, the always more than mediocre Elias Thompson is in our wild cards. This is seat today.
They call me Elias the Wild Card in real life. It's true.
I've
yes,
seen the business card. Yeah.
Yeah, on one of my thousands of different customized, individualized business cards. My name is Elias Thompson. I am a tabletop role-playing game player and dungeon master and all around good person. I have played, or so I tell myself, played tabletop RPGs. I want to say more or less since Jody introduced me to it way back in 2014 or something like that. 2013, 2014, and been a player for a long time, DM'd in the past few years as well. And there is lots of fun to be had in it, and I'm glad to talk more in depth about the topics surrounding this massive cultural revolution. How'd I do?
You're fantastic as always, Elias. So yeah, in this podcast, we're going to basically try and cover the three topics over the next two-ish hours. Because the world of role playing, as much as I understand, there are many different games out there, and you know, for every single genre and feeling and person. However, for the most part, when you look at the numbers, there is D&D and there is everything else. So one of the topics we'll be talking about will be related to D&D specifically in some way. One topic will be related to something non-D&D related. And then the third topic will be something that's currently happening in the tabletop world that maybe we think we should talk about, or just something that affects everyone playing this game, whether they know the inciting incident or not. But first thing I want to do is actually try something a little different on my second episode. I'm growing mad with power. I want to try just to talking about some of the stuff that we are actually doing or playing right now in a new section I called What Are You Playing? So if anyone wants to start off talking about maybe something fun that happened at a game, or a new system they're really interested in, or just a rule that you never looked at in a certain way until one of your players broke your perfectly created encounter by just destroying the two coolest enemies that you made instantly. Elias?
I still like what we did in our first game, Elias. Our DM, Elias and I play in a campaign together, and our DM you had on last week in Don Diego. And he had.
You're a little quiet all of a sudden, just so you know.
Almost sounds like you changed my mics or something.
Oh, okay. Sorry, fixing. Yep, it looks like that's exactly what happened. Sorry, guys. That's my bad.
Yeah, you're Canadian. Sorry. There you go.
Sorry. There's my.
If you needed any proof.
So Zoom decided to switch mics on me. Not sure why. I'll keep this down in case it does it again. But yeah, so in the very first game we ever had, Elias and I play in the same group, and our DM is Don Diego. Just to rehash what I was saying when I was quiet, who was a guest last week. He had this grand, like, YouTube-y thing that he wanted us to do, Elias, and we, as a full set of player characters, went, no. I mean, that was his whole arc, and we just noped it. And this was the very first game. We were kind of trying to figure our characters out. I think both Elias and I decided we wanted to choose the same kind of personality type. I let him have it because it wasn't something that was working very well.
You say that, but there's still quite a bit of it left in your character.
There is a little bit left in the character, I'll be honest, but I tried to soften the character a little bit. But just the whole session he had planned, and we noped him within, half an hour of the game beginning. And but that's when he showed his true DM colors. He took the nope, and he had a backup plan, and we kind of went with it. So I don't have a ton of experience comparatively to probably you guys, but that was, the one I remember the most.
Out of curiosity,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Out of curiosity, for this grand YouTube thing, were you like having to like roll for subscribers or something? Like how professional? So hang on. So let me contextualize. Professionally, I work in marketing, specifically in digital marketing, and so like
Oh my
social is a
God.
big thing for
Like
me.
you?
So I'm curious how you make that a mechanic in a game.
It was-
How did that work?
We
I
never
remember
found out.
pieces Well, I remember pieces of it
Oh yeah,
because
because you decided not to do it.
pretty much the whole session when he was seeing if it was what we wanted to do, which we were like, I don't know about this. But it was our characters were like auditioning to be in some kind of magically fueled like reality adventure show
Yeah.
that was like produced by some kind of company, and the entire first session was pretty much us like thinking they were up to no good and dismantling the entire production. I
That's
think.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, that was good times. But you guys probably have a lot more experience with games than I do.
I mean, I have.
I've played for like a larger number of years. I don't know that I have more experience. Really just even playing one game gets you into it.
Well, how do you measure a year in daylights, in sunsets?
Is this a Rent reference? Is that you're trying to get us to sing?
Yeah, we're not.
No, but please don't. Sing
you would copyright.
Besides, if we're gonna do a Rent sing along, we should do Out Tonight, not Seasons of Love. Interestingly, so I'm currently running 5 campaigns right now, and for me, yeah, I have 2 nights off a week, and this is one of them, and I decided to fill it with more D&D. Fancy that.
You may have a problem.
It is
found something he loved.
It's actually been really interesting trying to like monetize something that's been a hobby of mine for so long, because like on the one hand I look at it and I go, I'm just playing a game, like I don't feel right asking my players to pay me. And on the other hand I sit there and I go, if I were working on a TV show and I were spending this many hours writing stories and doing this much research and like working to like create these maps and characters and such, I'd have no problem collecting a salary. And so like it was finally over this past weekend talking about like what we're doing now, that I finally was able to sort of like get to that place in my head, and sort of really push forward with this. And nobody really has a problem with paying for the games given how much time I spend writing on them and things like that. I will say I did finally just kill my first client. To be fair,
In the game or in real life, or
is
this
this
got dangerous?
is this admissible as evidence? Because
you're not being recorded. It's fine.
if so,
Yeah.
yes, in the game. And that was a mountain I wasn't sure how I was going to surmount. And thankfully, this particular player was super cool about it. He already had a backup in place, and he fully accepted that it was his own fault that he died. He was 130 feet up in the air, and when you're reduced to 0 HP and you fall 130 feet, that 13d6 isn't going to be particularly gentle. And he was really cool about it, and so like that was actually like a big stress reliever for me. And so that's how my last session ran. I killed a paying customer. So you got to do it sometime.
That's brave.
To clarify, was this your first player to death, or just your first killing someone that was paying you?
This was my first client death.
Okay.
I've definitely killed my friends before.
Yeah, killing friends is easy.
Friends characters.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm gonna help out here
Yes,
when I can.
that's what he meant.
column A, column B.
Moving forward, characters every time.
Yes.
I just last night actually. I have been I started DMing a kind of home game, which has now moved to online for reasons, with some local friends. And last night we celebrated our like 1-year anniversary game, kind of as meeting up and doing the game together. It lined up really, really well actually, because they had just they were at a culmination of a particular arc, which had this big battle towards the entire later half of the session. And so knowing that was coming and it was going to coincide, like It was the first time as a because it's the first persistent campaign that I've DM'd. Everything before that had been one shots, and so I had the opportunity to make it just, relatively speaking, the most, big epic battle with like a bunch of NPCs coming in and, a bunch of forces clashing with each other parallel to that. And as a sort of gift to all of that, they did very well, and they leveled up. And so it was very rewarding for me as a dungeon master, to sort of see them get there and sort of achieve what they had been sort of working on through role play and through several encounters and like the past months of real time. So
Very cool. That's got to be really rewarding. That's awesome.
it was for me. I hope it was for them.
They're on another podcast, Bad Talking Elias, because he can't watch while being on this podcast.
I was hoping the story was you killed Tony's character, but I guess
A lot of them do stream. So if you see any of their streams and they're just like, God, I can't believe my dungeon master did this. Yeah.
So as far as me, like my games are kind of going the way I suspect them, except for I have a game I stream on. This is every other. This is Saturday with Elias and other peoples, and I created this really cool encounter for them with these really interesting enemies that all did really cool stuff. Like one person was psychic and would throw boulders, and one person could transform, things into other things, like Full Metal Alchemist, and one had this cool whip that would make you bleed. And they killed 3 of the 5 bad guys before an initiative.
Oh, geez.
Through an ambush. And I went, well, guess there goes. Yep, psychic's gone. Really cool alchemist dude is gone. Refrigerator shaped dude is gone.
I take no responsibility for creativity.
But and we're not talking about the Trifork nerdy, which is my really awesome magic item I gave them that had a really cool name and history, and they call it the Trifork and hit things with it. And
Hey, everything's a weapon if you're a barbarian.
And
Or a Goron.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, never get attached to the things you could create and then give to the players, because whatever you think you're making, they've got other ideas completely. And I'm one of those dungeon masters where if they don't ask, I don't tell them. I make their characters learn everything that they get. So I have a cool name for the item, but they didn't try to figure out what it was called. They just picked a name, which is Trifork. Yeah.
Shaped like a fork, had Triforce stuff on it. I mean, it speaks for itself.
Anyways, so that's a little bit about what's been going on with us specifically. Let's get to our actual topics. For our D&D topic, this particular issue is not technically limited to D&D, but I see it could come up a lot more in the D&D discussions than I do in other game systems. Like I read, what's it called? Vampire the Masquerade and the World of the Darkness stuff. You really don't hear about it a whole lot there, though I'm sure it exists, and Open Legend and all these other things. And that idea is min-maxers or munchkins or whatever you want to call them. These are players that want to win, and they will do whatever it takes as far as building their character to do that. It doesn't matter what logic states or anything. They will mix and match things. They will optimize their stats and give themselves really low stats and other things that just aren't as useful. I'm interested to hear what your guys' opinion are of either playing with min-maxers at the table, or if you yourself have ever done what you would consider min-maxing. So whoever has an idea first, feel free to jump in.
I guess I can start if you don't mind. I'm alluded to earlier that I was a video game player in the D&D world, like Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights. These are games that I loved, and the purpose in those games, for me at least, was to min-max. It was to make this best character I could possibly create in the video game because I want to achieve the goal. And when I had to roll up the character that I did, which I play right now, it's a druid. I'll be honest with you. I was trying to get how to do it, and my DM is like, just do whatever you want, whatever you feel comfortable with, and it was the only thing I knew. So I mean, my character, I'll be honest, when I rolled him up, he's pretty min-maxed. He's very focused in the stuff that's very useful to druids. He chose what I consider the best circle for the druid. He's got a lot of things going for him. But once I got into the character, I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. It's something I didn't know really going in because my experience was so different. Now, don't get me wrong, it's cool to be able to put up big numbers on things, but early on I was tanking, even though we had 2 warriors in the group, because I was just like, this isn't something that I'm trying to fill a gap, trying to fill a need. It's not what makes I'm strongest at, but it's just something I want to do. So I kind of was on both sides of that equation, where when you don't really understand that these flaws truly bring out the best plays in a game, I think by nature you will choose a character that, well, why wouldn't I go this way? I've built other characters since, not min-maxed, and I as much as I enjoy my main character still, I enjoy creating characters with flaws now. I like seeing those issues come forth when they're being played.
People, the attitude you have if and when you do create a min-max character for whatever reason is really what the important thing is, in my opinion. Because if you're going into a role-playing game and you're very well versed with the rules and the character creation methods and everything you need to min-max, if it makes sense, or if you're just looking to be capable in a battle, right, you're gonna gravitate towards making certain numbers high and certain numbers low based off of whatever choices you've made and character creation. But if their attitude or their outlook towards it is I want to win Dungeons and Dragons, or I want to win the game, right?
Yeah.
That's in all likelihood going to cause a lot of DM versus player, not necessarily the players, but just like a lot of back and forth there that may not translate very well during the actual game. But if they have a good attitude on the opposite of that, and they just happen to be a very capable, person in combat, then I think the DM has to, recognize that and just, scale and balance the encounters that do happen a little bit accordingly. That way everybody's sort of just happy with what's going on.
Yeah. I think to piggyback off that, right now I'm lucky enough that none of my current players are sort of min-maxed. I have had some conversations with people recently about how to optimize their characters for their play type, but most of them are newer players. They're trying to learn. As a barbarian, when's the best time for me to rage? As a druid, when's the best time for me to wild shape? And I'm trying to encourage them to be a little more freeform with that, because otherwise what happens is we'll go 3 or 4 sessions without them using some of these once a day or once a short rest abilities. And so I actively work to get people to be a little bit more aggressive with their abilities. The side effect of that is that I, as a DM, tend to give out pretty high level magic items, boons. I tend to be pretty liberal with divine interventions and things like that to encourage people in the early stages of a campaign, for good or ill. But I have played as a player at tables where people are actively min-maxing. I played in a Rifts campaign, a Rifts and Marvel Universe crossover. If you don't know the Palladium Rift system, It's super, super crunchy. There are stats for literally everything. Like I think there's literally a stat for like crossing the street. It's nuts. And I was at a table of, a half dozen players where everybody wanted to be the best at everything all the time. And that caused a lot of friction. It's because we were all min maxing. We were all trying to build the jack of all trades, expert at everything on top of it. And I know that was really highly disruptive to our GM story. And I wish I could sort of go back in time and before I started playing that game, tell myself like, no, like pick a niche, explore it, dig in, and you'll probably like your character more. Because I left that game feeling like all my characters were pretty much the same, and I found that to be a little boring.
Yeah, I spent I think the 3 years or so something. I live in Wisconsin. We have a huge D&D community here, because Gary Gygax created it just literally on the border of Wisconsin and Illinois. Um, and We have a lot of conventions that happen in the Milwaukee and Madison area, including a couple that we get Wizards of the Coast and Critical Role people that could come down every year. And Because I was a part of the convention scene and I was a local coordinator for the Adventurers League for D&D's play group play program. I would over a weekend I would run half a dozen games and would play in 4 or 5 more, and I would play with 50 to 100 people every weekend for 5 or 6 weekends this summer. It was really interesting because the Adventures League, because you don't know who you're going to be sitting at a table with and then next a lot of the times, a lot of people will make their character good at everything and kind of min-max just as a survival thing, because if you lose your character, that's it. You've just wasted sometimes 3 or 4 years playing a character, and now you get to start at level 1. So that's when I kind of made a differentiation to people that are optimizing their play and min-maxers, who would do things like they would buy all the adventures to look at what magic items you got in every adventure to ensure that they played the right adventures to get the magic items they wanted to boost their character. Wizards was just so against that they actually wouldn't allow dungeon masters to discuss what or the Adventurers League, not Wizards, what items were in each adventure, because they didn't want people finding out what magic item was in each adventure, despite the fact that just playing it once you would figure that out. But
yeah, well, I will say to the point of me personally having intentionally min-maxed once, and this is a little off from D&D, but a friend of mine had experimented for a while of creating his own system, sort of just seeing what he could do and creating his own system. And he ran a little one shot towards the end of an extent of time, just so he could get a game in and see how it played. The character I made for that was extremely the most min-maxed I could make it, because I was doing it with the express purpose of trying to test the limits and trying to see if it could be broken in any way, so that I could give that feedback to him and be like, maybe this shouldn't be allowed to go this high or this low and stuff like that. And so, yeah, that was I think another example of a time I personally did it where I think it would be potentially appropriate. But again, it goes back to the attitude and sort of the reasons you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a context. If you have to play test a new module or a session, or if you're a home brewer of rules and you need to play test it, having a munchkin in the party really helps reveal some of the flaws in your build. It can point out, overpowered items, overpowered builds. Just recently I play tested the new there's like fan made class for 5e called the princess class, where you can make your character like a princess of like different universes and stuff like that. And I specifically tried to find a player that would go out of their way to min max that class just to see how broken it could be. There's always a use case for like trying to uber optimize or min max. But I think it's always context sensitive, and it depends if you're screwing other players over as well. As long as you're letting everybody play, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's what I was wanting to get at. It's read the group sort of idea.
Yeah.
You're playing a game together, hopefully with friends or people of like mind, and just be a part of the adventure. Don't be the adventure.
Go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Okay. One of the things that actually turned me off to Pathfinder, which say whatever you want, Pathfinder is D&D. It's what it is. Be as proud of Pathfinder as you want, but it's D&D. There's a play program called the Pathfinder Society, which a lot of the early Adventures League stuff they stole directly from PFS. But it's been going longer than Adventures League by like a decade. I think it's been going on for a while. One of the things that turned me off to it is at least in Wisconsin, I've heard other places that's a lot nicer. In Wisconsin, we have a heavy competitive PFS at all the conventions, to the point where one of my friends who plays for 5e with me and did at my conventions wanted to play a PFS game. So you start at level 1, just like any organized play program. And he's like, "Oh, this will be for fun. I think I'll make a gnome druid. That would be a fun character to play." And as soon as he sat down at the table, somebody else just over his shoulder starts looking at his character, goes, no. You're supposed to take this and picked him apart completely because he didn't min-max his character. And because of the competitiveness of the PFS, they kicked him off the table because they were worried that he would just screw up the game for everyone else. Because again, this is maybe just a Wisconsin thing, but Pathfinder captains and the DMs get rewards for running games and stuff like that. And I read this is somewhere that they actually get rewards for killing players.
It just sounds like go in a room somewhere, roll some dice, don't even play.
Well, it blew me away with just how competitive and aggressive everyone was, because it was 100% the DM versus the players. Anytime you play an adventure, you're never allowed to play that adventure again with any character. So it's your first time ever seeing the adventure. If you run the adventure, you're never allowed to play it. It's just
It's reasons like this why I didn't get into D&D sooner. I'll be honest.
And it's one of the things I like about the Adventures League, because the only limit is you can't play the same adventure with the same character, because it doesn't make sense. But
that sounds so not fun for new players. Like, how are you supposed to learn if there's that high a barrier to entry?
Well, and that's the thing with PFS is, while it's started as a way as an infection vector is what I call, which may be poor wording in this particular instance, but I
think it's perfect for this instance.
It used to be a way to get new players into it. Now it has turned into kind of an elite play situation where the people that are playing it are going in there to be extremely challenged and things like that, which again, there's some people that really enjoy that. Back in fourth edition, I used to play what's called fourth core, which was we called it D&D hard mode, but basically they were fourth edition. Did I just lose?
We may never know what happened. Okay.
Am I back?
Oh, you're back.
You're back.
back.
You're good. Everything's fine. Continue. Back in 4th edition, you said.
Oh, I love internet connections. Back in 4th edition, I played a thing called Fourth Core, which we called the D&D hard mode. It was basically these adventures that were designed to kill player characters off, like Tomb of Horrors style thing. You were encouraged to bring to 2 or 3 characters. You had 4 hours to complete the adventure. If you weren't done in 4 hours, you lost. And everything was high DCs. It was as much a challenge for the player characters as was for the players. They would have puzzles in there, and it was just super fun. It was not something I would ever recommend to someone who never played, because you were expected to min-max your characters. You were expected to play at peak efficiency, because you did one thing wrong and you could screw it up for the entire table.
You know, at least this explains gatekeeping in this industry then, because there's a lot of people that was like, no, for 15, 20 years, we evolved to this point of hyper competitiveness. And now you want to bring in the storytelling version of this game? No, I don't want that. I want it to go back to the way it was. And I mean, I'm not excusing those people at all. I think they're garbage, frankly. But you know, this new version has brought in so many people, like so many more people to enjoy this game that people have been loving for decades. You know, I don't get why others need to feel that they're going to ruin everyone else's fun because this isn't the way that I've been doing this for 20 years. Well, you know what? There's a reason it changed.
I think one of the benefits, not to get this is slightly off the topic here, but one of the benefits of 5th edition is it can cater to so many play styles. If you want to min-max and play, you know, DM versus the players, you totally can do that. You have all the tools necessary. If you want to do a really story-focused campaign, you can. Anything in the middle, you can. Whereas you look at something like 3rd edition or the 3.5, it was really number crunchy. It required you to know the system really well in order to not build a useless character by about like 7 or 8 level. And that's where a lot of the people, because 4th edition was overlooked wrongfully, I will add, because I love it. And I will die on that mountain. But they were coming directly from the super crunchy the 3rd edition to 5th edition, which still has lots of numbers and it can get crunchy, but you don't need to.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know, because a lot of people, once they find a way they like to play, tend to stick with it. But there are so many ways to play this game, right? Especially once you get, you know, a lot more experienced and you learn a lot of the numbers of the rules offhand. There can be a lot of fun in doing just a hardcore like survival mode dungeon crawl where it basically is all of you versus the DM, and everyone's agreed to that and everyone's there for that kind of fun. But at the same time, especially in the case of like public play at like conventions, you don't want to advertise yourself as like, hey, come try it out with this, right? When in reality, it's for, you know, it's essentially for experienced people who are basically going to require min-maxing or something like that. But yeah, there's so many different ways to kind of play where min-maxing is appropriate in a lot of cases. But then there's also times where it's totally optional and not at all required, I think.
Yeah, and rules as written, or raw 5e really rewards optimized play if that's the way you want to do it. You can make yourself a half elf sorcerer and you get the stat bonuses that you need to make yourself a more effective character. But on the flip side, there's also not too heavy a penalty for skewing away from that. So say you want to play, a gnomish barbarian, you can almost just as easily get them to a +4 or +5 to hit at level 2 or 3 as you would, a half-orc barbarian. And so I think that's what sort of sets 5e apart, is that if you want to optimize, if you want to min max, the mechanics are still there for you to exploit or leverage, depending on what your motivations are. I think it could be one or the other. But if you don't, or if you just have no concept of what that even is, you're not punished for it in something like, say, AD&D, where like if you don't have a super high Thaco as a warrior, you're not going to make it through your first session. So you have to optimize. And I think that's what's made 5e more accessible, is the tools are there for the people who want to do it.
Yeah.
Last kind of question for all of us, since most of us are dungeon masters, and all of us play with dungeon masters at their tables. Something I have noticed, since almost all my friends are dungeon masters, and at conventions, all the people I hung out with were the people running tables, because you just kind of bond. Something I found interesting is none of my DM friends min-maxed almost at all. My DM friends were much more likely to play weird, kind of niche like characters, because they had seen so much perfect characters that it got them bored. Do you guys see that with other friends, with yourselves?
I've got limited exposure personally. I know I've just started DMing a little bit, and when I now make characters, I think of, I've had this NPC in mind, wonder how it plays, sort of idea. So I think that might be more of a DM's sort of brain, where it's like, I can flesh a character out in a game and then use it as an NPC. This is great. Or, flesh out an idea. It's all about accumulative stuff. I don't, and I generally believe, like, the DM from the games I've seen and witnessed usually lose the battle. So they're okay with, they're okay with not, taking the thing down. So for them, the fun is different. A lot of the fun why the DM is they like to build a thing for people to experience, at least in my experience, as opposed to, winning the day. So I can see that, absolutely.
It does remind me of a meme that some players in a game I ran in once, where it was a couple of experienced people who just said, your first D&D character, and it's just like this, armored up paladin, courageous looking fellow, right? And then you're like 100th D&D character, it's just like a woman in a dress holding a watermelon and a gun. Like it's just such a stark contrast, because you're just trying to do different things.
Yep.
But yeah, like for me personally, when I go to make a character, especially now that I've been able to play and make a few of them, I am similar in that I want to try to do something I haven't done before, right? If I'm just playing the same character with a different name and look, it's not a whole lot of fun for me as a player. Outside when you're talking about multiple campaigns. And then from a dungeon master perspective too, I tend to just think about like what's going to make it the most fun for the players. Once you get a sense of the kind of game and how they play, like what kind of challenges or what kind of like story points do you think they should, or you think they would enjoy?
I will say that the one thing I think is fun about playing with min maxers in your group, as speaking as a DM, is I then get an opportunity to optimize the encounters against them, and that can open up like a whole world of exploration, like monsters I've never gotten to use before. Like I get to come up with like really gnarly traps, just like trying to find a way to like get one over on the road. And that has actually led me to like some really awesome builds and stories as the storyteller with them. And so I want to be clear. I don't think anyone here would say that min maxing or optimizing is a bad thing. I think it really has to do with, if you have the right group of players and the right story, it can be an awesome way to play the game. But if you are a min maxer playing in a table full of people who just want to tell like a fun story about like a magical high school or something, you might not have fun, and the people you're playing with might not have fun.
Definitely. Along those lines, that actually transitions really well, much better than I would love to say I planned this to transition. I didn't. I picked random things. This sounded cool.
You're
Always
welcome.
the pro.
That's just like being a DM. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I totally
welcome to D&D.
planned that. Yeah, that's been the plan since session 1.
Yep.
For a non D&D topic, as I've mentioned before, there are tons of game systems and rule systems and modifications of rule systems. Like the Fate system has 70 different iterations, and the Cypher system has, I know of 5 different rule sets for Cypher that I have on my PC right now. With all those different rule systems, do you guys enjoy or I guess we could talk about the pros and cons of rules heavy systems like Pathfinder or D&D 3, the third and the 3.5, or do you prefer, or I guess the pluses and minuses of more rules light storytelling to the type systems like Open Legend or I'm trying to think. Someone come up with another rules light system. I've drawn a blank.
Open Legend. Wait.
Thank you.
I played one pager in San Diego. I don't remember what it's called.
Swords and Flowers, Burrows and Bunnies. Both of those are very rules light.
Yeah, the things like that. So, for the group, first of all, have you personally played a rules light system or a rules heavy system? And then, but beyond that, do you have one style you prefer, or are there aspects of like one like on certain days I really like rules light, and other ones I really like are these situations it's more fun to play with rules light versus rules heavy?
I've done a little bit of rules light. Quite frankly, it wasn't for me personally. I saw that there were a lot of other people at the table that this was their infection vector. This is what they wanted. They was like, hey, I've heard of this thing, but it's just too complicated. I don't want to read that many books or dive into that much source material. I just want to be able to sit at a table, learn something in 10 minutes and go. And you know, watching other people go through that experience and them enjoying it, I think that there's value in these things. For me, I like something that's in the middle, something that isn't rules heavy, but isn't too light. I like to have that little bit, but that's just a personal preference for me. I like to do a little bit of reading, a little bit of research, a little bit of, playing around within the world. I find when you have something rules light, some may say that, the world is your oyster. You can literally do whatever you want. And in other cases, you roll a dice and see what happens. For me personally, I like to have a little bit more meat, but I definitely see that there is a market for the rules light, and there's a lot of people that really enjoy that.
Yeah, I have a so back in 2010, I backed a system on Kickstarter called Storm Hollow. And they were specifically pitching themselves as an all ages tabletop game. And of course, they went through the inevitable Kickstarter purgatory. And so I finally got my box in
Yesterday.
yeah, 2 weeks ago. I finally got my box, and it was like a 50-pound like box of stuff because they had tacked so much stuff on that I feel like if they had just focused in and like really tried to keep it to an all ages accessible sort of like flashcard based rules light system, it would have been great. The problem is with the rules light systems, because you want to account for all of the potential exceptions or like do something interesting, they ended up shipping this gigantic box of cards that had so many characters and so many items and so many places that it went from being simple to being overly complex. And for me, I much prefer just focusing in on the complexity from the start, having a clear set of rules that account for most of your exceptions that are already built in, and you boil them down to your most common use case, which is where I think 5e kind of shines. Is because they do have that. They've worked very hard to boil down that system to just be like, you're going to roll a d20 and occasionally do something else. And I think that's about as rules light as you can get, without the table devolving into a little bit of chaos. Like, that's been my experience. Like, I've done Burrows and Bunnies, I've done Swords and Flowers. And for the most part, I feel like those tables seem to have a much harder time completing an objective than a more rules heavy game, because there's less direction.
Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with that assessment. I think, again, I had experience with the 3.5, and I played a lot of 4, which were both pretty crunchy, rules heavy styles of D&D. And I think the absolute best thing that the 5th edition did was advantage to disadvantage, simply because they have a rules for a lot of things, but they don't have, like, thank you for the phone.
Thanks, phone.
They don't have rules for everything. Like, if you look at the 3rd edition, this is especially, they have rules for every situation you could ever think of, and a few more that you never would have thought of. For 5th edition, they go, these are most of the situations you deal with, and anytime something weird happens, they give it to the DM. If you think it's easy or it's creative, give them advantage. If it sounds difficult, give them the disadvantage. No more rules required. No floating modifiers. No things. I really like that aspect of the 5th edition.
Me too.
I've had the experience of playing in primarily the 2 systems I've played in are Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, which, depending on how you play, can be pretty rules heavy. Mm-hmm. And then Open Legend, which we mentioned earlier, which likes to call itself rules light. But even Open Legend sort of succumbs a little bit to what Michael was talking about, where for the most part, when you're actually playing the game, especially as a player, it is, as it advertises, it's very open. Like, it does a very good job of just rewarding creativity of, like, I just want to do this thing, and then it's up to the DM to how to work it in there. But the downside that does sort of come to that is just like, well, if someone comes up with a super like breaking thing, how do you, and is able to justify that with the little rules that are there, how do you like cap that, or how do you like sort of curb that a little bit? And so, like, I got the opportunity to buy the rule book for that as well. It's almost as thick as the player's handbook for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, because there's just a lot of like little things in there. But both are enjoyable to play, at least in my opinion. I will say you do have to sort of get used to playing sort of one way or the other. When I first started playing Open Legends, I'd only had played 5th edition before, and so there was definitely a period of time where I just was not used to being able to just say, I do this cool thing I just thought of just now, without having to think like, well, wait, what's my major action, what's my minor action, and what's my movement, or like what can I do in this situation. But once you sort of get used to whatever system you're doing, I think rules heavy or rules light, if you sort of find that you're able to do it as you get used to that, then it can be pretty enjoyable either way, I think.
Yeah, the Rifts game that I had played in, I think is like a really good example of like rules heavy that can work, but can be a little daunting from the outside. When I first started, I had never played Palladium systems before. And I sat down at this table, and all of a sudden I'm looking at ADC, MDC, different types of shields, pops, different types of damages that affect those shields differently. You get like a certain number of action points in a turn, and different things use different numbers of action points. Some you can carry over, some you can't. and it was just like this just influx of information. And even for me, and I played tons of games and tons of systems, it was so overwhelming. Um, and I had never like gotten an opportunity to really dig into it before. But once you settle in, like it became really fun. Like there was something super satisfying about. So I in this X Men crossover game, I played X Man, who's sort of the precursor to Cable from like Deadpool comics and everything. There was something really cool about being able to play that character and like use like an anti-material rifle and shoot down like a space battleship and do like and have to sit down and literally have to do math for like 10 minutes at the table to figure out that you did like 75 million damage to this thing in one turn. And like that dopamine rush of, oh my god, that's such a huge number, I'm so cool. That was really satisfying, I think, in a way that like just the okay, yeah, you do it isn't. But that just might be the way I'm wired. I know there are plenty of people out there that would look at that and go, I have to calculate how many numbers there are, how many people here. But for me, like it was just a huge dopamine rush every time we were doing like multi-million damage attacks, and we'd all have to like sit down and be like, okay, who brought a calculator? And that was enjoyable. Like it was a good like little bonding experience to like walk through and just go, oh my god, that's so huge.
I think it might have been Don. I mentioned this on a podcast years ago. Or maybe it was just a good conversation I had. But he was talking about he or someone. My memory is so bad. This could be literally any person I've ever to talk to.
So you were talking to Gary Gygax. Yep.
Yeah, totally nice guy. He was talking about he was at a convention. Oh, it might have been one of my convention friends. He was at a convention and he was playtesting a new system written by a couple math students. And as soon as he sat down at the table, he like you could tell this was written by math people. Like there were tables everywhere, and to do anything, you'd have to roll on this and then add this and then go to this table, but then it could bring you to that. And the two people that created it were playing as well to have enough people, and they were the only two people that seemed to know what they were doing. Everyone else was completely lost. But they were having the time of their lives, and everyone else at the table was having fun just because they were enjoying it. And a lot of times they would, I mean, the math people would have to basically play other people's characters simply because they didn't know how to do anything in this complex calculus based system. And so they go, well, I just wanted to do this. Oh, then you need to and everyone had fun, but it was definitely not a game that even most people could enjoy, because it was made by like hyper math people for other hyper math people, which is a surprisingly small subsection of the population.
There's no such thing as a perfect system. Like there's going to be, every system is going to appeal to certain people and other people are going to absolutely hate it. And that's just the reality of any game, really.
I think my thing, like I turn every system I play into a rules light system because I really enjoy the flavor text. Like even when I play something like the third edition or something like that, I'm going to flavor my character a lot. I'll still use all the mechanics I'm supposed to, but I want my character to at least look cool in my mind.
I do. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
No, I do appreciate when DMs understanding the story bend the rules a little bit to create the better narrative. Great example from our game. We had one of our character basically get turned into stone, and we had nobody who had a cure for that. Like it just we weren't high enough level. So
see, getting stone causes a lot of
good point. But like, so I'm sitting there and going like, I don't have anything I can do here. And then, the DM kind of tossed me a bone. He's like, look, if you basically blow your top 2 levels of skill slots, I'll let you do a prayer roll to see if you can figure out how to do this. I got a lucky roll and we were able to pull it off, but
Mhm.
I lost all my 3rd level and all my 2nd level spells for the day. I thought that was a great compromise. I mean, I lost a lot and we were hamstrung for the rest of the battle, but we kept their character, and that was more important to me.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate when DMs do that sort of thing.
So can I tack on just like a small follow-on question on the topic then? Speaking of that, in a rules-heavy game, how appropriate or inappropriate is it to follow the rule of cool? I'm a very rule of cool based DM. Like, if you can come up with a good idea or describe it in a way that like I think is especially cinematic, I'll probably just let you do it. But in a rules heavy system, that can create some inequities at the table. So like, where is that line, and is it appropriate if you are specifically playing a rules heavy or rules light system? Like, where does that distinction come into play? Because that obviously falls into rule of cool. You're like, oh, you're going to do this really awesome thing. You're going to put in the effort, and like there's a story base to it. But from a mechanical standpoint, obviously it shouldn't work. Is it good or bad in the system focused on the mechanics?
I feel like it depends on the. I probably say this too much, but I feel like it goes back to the kind of game you want to play, right?
Mhm.
If you're doing, something that you're doing a role heavy system with to, have that base structure, like a dungeon diving type of thing, right? You obviously want to stick to the rules like 100% of the time, usually. Because that's what they're there for. They're there to, try to game the system as much as possible. For those that try to play role playing games for like, they're there to, be a character and feel cool about it and do some cool, sometimes some not cool things, and collectively tell a story about it. I think that it's a lot more appropriate to sort of bend the rules. Just in the game I was talking about at the outset, the last one, I may have possibly made the final boss actual character a little too weak. And it may or may not have should have died a lot sooner. However, I just sort of made them go unconscious and had them start roll death saves. They got a natural 20, ironically, so they came back up, and which you're supposed to come back up at 1 hit point. But it was this cool cinematic thing of like, oh, this person we're fighting has like special, powers that allows them to sort of keep going. And I obviously would not have, put them back in there if they were in rough shape, but they were doing pretty well, like I said. And so it just gave them that little extra surprise of just like, oh crap, this is not a normal battle.
It's not even my final form.
kind of similar to that, right? And so I tacked on a few extra hit points and let them, take them down again. While they still had to deal with like all the chaos in the battlefield. So I think that if that's the kind of thing they're expecting, right, where they're just trying to do a cool battle or do a cool thing, then I think bending the rules is completely appropriate.
I mean, even as a player, that the same battle, with Gorgons to keep it simple. And I'm like, I remember, Clash of the Titans. I'm going to cut off a head and put it in my bag. So I have a Gorgon head, which every single battle I can do this. I could I can try to make him roll and I'm like, no, that's not fun. I think we've used it once or twice, Elias, and that was it.
The head is probably not in the best shape right now.
No, it's probably dripping and
covered in maggots.
I honestly completely forgot about it until just now.
But like I knew
rolling saves to just save against getting stoned, and start rolling saves to just save against being grossed out.
Probably, yeah. But it was one of those things that like I knew we had really an overpowered item, but the DM kind of trusted us with a narrative, and I was like, I used it once, it was kind of cool, but nah, it's too powerful. So as a player, you have as much to say in the rule of cool, I think, as the DM does. Just got to be aware of it.
And I think to echo what's been said over and over again, your table makeup matters. Especially, to go back to an earlier discussion, if you have a min-maxer at the table that everyone's kind of just agreed that, yeah, that's what this person's going to be, and you start allowing people to do things that bend or break the rules that they have learned so meticulously and maximize their character to take advantage of, that can be a really big kind of slap to the face
Yeah.
for the person that has put all this time and effort into optimizing and min-maxing their character to the point where if I've had a disruptive min-maxer at my table and I had the option to use some rule of cool for other players, I would sometimes use that to try and get them to back off, where they go, well, I'm going to do this and this, and according to this random rule in this rule book that you've never read, blah, 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 I can do this. I go, fine. Mm-hmm. This other character goes, can I do, this and this? Yeah, sure. Just to kind of put them in perspective. Yeah, if you want to play that way, that's good, great. I'm not going to limit everyone else at the table simply because you've had 7 years to learn this system compared to their 15 minutes. So,
or having way more disposable income, because let's be fair, some of those books get a little pricey.
Yeah. One of the reasons I've really been, as horrible as this may sound, one of the things I think has been great about locking down and everything is tons of companies have been giving away rule books for free. Like, I kid you not, I've gotten a dozen new systems from this. And some of them have been amazing. I think one of them I actually got from one of the tweets you put out, Michael, about, I can't remember, it had sword in the topic, or in the title.
Pokemon Sword and Shield.
That's exactly it. No. Sword and Castles or something like that?
It might have been Swords and Flowers, because that's one of the ones that I've retweeted pretty recently.
Maybe it was this one was hardcore, like an advanced Dungeons and Dragons or D. This is the second edition.
Okay. Yeah, I know the one you're talking about. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I know what you're talking about.
I found it for free. I read it, realized that I'm probably never going to run that specific system, but it's nice to have it.
Yeah,
I collect these systems like crazy. Humble Bundle has RPG book bundles every so often, and I snatch those up. $15 for like 600 bucks worth of like World of Darkness books or Pathfinder. I have Pathfinder books I'm never going to use.
Some of the books are hard to find too.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how long it took me to find the Tal'Dorei campaign book. Like, it was over a year and a half. I couldn't find it anywhere. Just recently came back into stock on Amazon, but these things are gold in some places.
Critical Role just sells out. Like, they literally could create a Critical Role paper book where all it is every single page is just a piece of paper. But they stamp the Critical Role logo on it and have, Laura talk about it as in a new merch, and it will sell out. And people will do amazing things with it. Like, someone will use it as an art book, another person will rip it into tiny pieces and make a mosaic out of it. Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying Critical Role stuff sells out all the time.
And it's nice to have reference books and materials too. Like, I have the better part of like 20 GURPS books. I have never in my life run or played in a GURPS campaign ever. But like, it's so cool because like they're so niche and they're so genre specific that like I really can dig into it. And like, speaking of complex rule sets, like GURPS is like it's literally a universal. It's a general universal role playing system, I think is what it stands for. And you can do anything in that system. You could be like a cyberpunk slinger cowboy sheriff on the moon, and you can build a stat block for that. And like, that's where I think Rules Heavy shines, is because you can invite a new player in and just have them come up with bizarre ideas and guide them through that process.
GURPS was, I think, my first non D&D system I played in. I've never run it, nor will I ever. But it turned me off to non D&D stuff simply because the game master I played under didn't explain anything, didn't help me build a character. He just gave me the core rule book. He created his own world and everything. So it was all homebrew, but he gave me the core rule book and said, "This is how it goes." And I'd been DMing 5e for like a year by that point. So I'm like, oh, I can, I created Peppa Pig as a D&D character. I can do this. Completely lost in a sea of rules and modifiers.
There's so much to unpack in some of those systems, and GURPS is one of the chief offenders of that. Is like there is literally a GURPS book for anything under the sun you can come up with, and if you don't have that book, you have no idea how it works.
Oh yeah, and if you have a GM who's making his own setting and randomly, like the character I wanted to play. I like to do dual wielding. I think it's cool to the point where I have actually, because I used to do martial arts. Obviously, I'm slightly out of practice, but I learned how to wield weapons simultaneously. I learned Kabuto Sasai, and I used to practice with katana. I'd practice in both my hands, so I was partially ambidextrous with just certain other things. So I wanted to play a guy that used two rapiers because I'd seen Shanghai Knights and it was a really cool fight scene. So I'm like, I want to do this. He's like, well, no one can actually fight like that. So we're going realistic. And I kept sitting there thinking, no, that's a real fighting style. And after I could quit the campaign after 4 sessions because I could not stand it. I actually look it up. It is a real fighting style. It's called the Florentine style of fencing. And it was considered a very advanced form because you had to do 2 things. But it was basically the same thing as fighting with a rapier and parrying dagger, where one was always your defensive weapon and one was your offense. The only difference being you could actually switch for things. And so, that to me, that's where the rules heavy systems start to break down a little bit, is when they have so many rules that they kind of prevent you from being creative and doing more unique things.
When your rules heavy, you rely on your rules, and the more heavy you are, the more you rely on them, and creativity gets lost. So.
Well, my favorite example, because again in Wisconsin we have addition wars all the time, and I bet you. You guys probably had them as well, but I used to have people, Pathfinder people mostly would talk about 3rd edition was the best. My favorite example is like, okay, build me a character that can dual wield 2 short swords. Shouldn't be that hard, and it's not difficult in 3rd edition generally, and that doesn't have a negative modifier to their main hand attack. In 3rd edition, you generally have to be either like 5th or 7th level, depending on your class, because you have to take 2-weapon fighting, ambidextry helps, improved to do 2-weapon fighting. So by that point, at like 5 or 7, you can actually start playing the character you want. 5th edition, level 1, give them 2 short swords. As long as they can wield short swords, they can do it. It's not that either system is better or worse. It's just one you really have to understand the system to get what you want. The other one you just kind of do it.
People aren't gonna, a lot of people aren't gonna wait 3, 5, 7 levels to do what they want. They want to do some level of it right away, or they're gone. I mean, today you don't have people going into things, generally for the long haul. You got a shorter attention span that's prevalent. You got to. In my opinion, you got to allow them to play how they want to play, at least to a point early. I mean, they're obviously not going to be as strong as they want to be, but if they can wield 2 swords and do 3 damage, perfect.
I would like to be a level 1 god, please.
Well, depending on what your portfolio you want is, we've currently got an opening for a god of toilet bowl cleaners. Does that sound like a good fit for you?
Perfect.
In this day and age, a god of a cleaning product would be highly revered.
Yeah, joke's on you, buddy.
Lysol god. There you go. I'm playing tomorrow night in a stream where it's a cinematic D&D kind of game. I don't know if you guys have ever done that. It's more about, they put you in a world and they want to tell a story, and they're very loosey goosey with the rules.
Really, a
you know,
game that's loose with the rules, like turning the players into Power Rangers.
well, let's just say that last week a ranger killed a ghost with a good religion roll.
Ha! I love it.
Loosey goosey, but it's that's the way that these people wanted to play the game, because they're like, we want to tell the story, but we don't want to have to read a book sort of idea, but we like the world. And then the DM in it, friend of at least most of us, Omar Najam, he is a storyteller, and that's what his focus is, and he is very much, I'll allow it, and just to kind of get people brought in and to play and to tell a story. And I mean, it goes back to, I think, to what we've all been saying tonight. It's about really, what game do you as a group want to play, and just play that game. And as long as you have that as your mantra, then I think you're going to be fine. As long as everybody at the table wants to play the same game.
Yeah. Wow, you found this as a secret with that answer.
Amazing.
Another perfect segue that I obviously planned.
Obviously.
Obviously. The next kind of current event topic, I do want to preface this with the fact that we are going to be talking about some very sensitive, very heavy topics here. All of us are going to attempt to choose our words very, very, very carefully. However, with how intense and emotional these topics can be, there's a very good chance that all of us may misspeak or choose words poorly in order to try to make the point we're making. So I simply ask the audience themselves, give us the benefit of the doubt. What we're going to talk about here is really important. And is very, very, very difficult to talk about, whether this is your first day playing or whether you've been doing this for 20 years. To kind of preface this, at the end of March, there was an incident in a very well-known game that I'm not going to name specifically, just to kind of avoid all the bad feelings and just bad situation that it could created. But the basics of what happened was the DM created a situation that was inappropriate for the players, role played through this situation, despite the fact that the player in question was doing everything they could to get out of this situation. And it resulted in all of their players quitting the show, and the show has ended after just that one situation. What happened afterwards with everything, I don't really want to get into. There's a lot of emotions surrounding it. But it did bring to light a situation that, if you've ever been on r/RPG's horror stories, you've probably read about. But because they portray it as kind of a, oh my god, I can't believe it, you kind of get the feeling like this stuff doesn't really happen. It's just entertainment. But dealing with this is sensitive to the topics, things like abuse or assault of any kind of nature, mental illnesses, even things that a lot of people may not think are sensitive, things like war or manipulation or death. All of these topics can not only be very difficult for some people to experience through a role-playing medium, but to give you a very, very personal example for my own life, I have PTSD from. Technically have two different versions of this. It's the same thing. I had an incident when I was a child of something very, very, very bad happening to me that I'm not going to get into. That was so bad that I repressed the memory until I was in my 20s. And it resulted in a lot of really bad stuff happening for most of my life that I didn't even realize it was doing. And I have what's called complex PTSD, which is basically where it's not a single event that causes you to actually develop these symptoms, but it's repeated abuse over years and sometimes decades. Because of that, I react very poorly to certain situations to the point where they can actually trigger my PTSD, which can cause me to dissociate, which is really uncomfortable and can be dangerous for me because sometimes I believe that nothing is real. And if nothing's real, it doesn't really matter if I hurt myself or anything like that. So, and it can also cause panic attacks. It can cause me to have flashbacks. I have a therapist. I work with all this stuff, but there are certain triggers that I have to watch out for. And something that triggered me that caught me completely by surprise was I was watching the Critical Role monster game thing they did where they were all high school
Cinderbrush.
Students. Yeah.
Cinderbrush.
Where they were also monsters as well as high school students. And one of the characters was this hyper manipulative cool girl played by one of the nicest people in the world. But she played it so well, she triggered memories that I had forgotten of one of the people that had manipulated me heavily and led to my complex PTSD to the point where I've never watched, I think, more than about the 30 minutes of that episode because I can't make it through. And nothing she did was wrong. Nothing she did was offensive. She simply triggered my own thing. So with that, I'd like everyone here to, if a sensitive topic is going to happen in your games, in our conversations before the podcast, Michael specifically brought up some of the techniques you can use before the game even starts to mitigate it, and I'd love for us to talk about that, but also to also focus on when situations show up that you weren't expecting that can breach into sensitive topics. So since you mentioned it in the chat beforehand, Michael, if you'd like to start with maybe even just to talking about the systems you mentioned in there, and we can kind of go off of that.
Sure. So this might be something unfamiliar to newer players, or depending on who your GM is, and different GMs may leverage these differently. But most games will start with a session 0, where all the players and the GM will get together. They'll discuss the setting. They'll discuss sort of like the general aesthetics of the campaign. Just overarching things that people want to see. It's where like some good in-jokes will come from, like maybe like a cool NPC, names of certain cities, things like that. And it's also where you give the players an opportunity to express to you the types of content they want to see or don't want to see. For me, Session 0 has always been a really useful part of my games because I always relied on that as a way for my players to tell me if they had specific triggers they wanted to avoid or topics that were maybe they weren't comfortable with. Because some games, if you go really hard into the RP, if you really lean into the Tolkien stuff, like you dive into a lot of potential racism, ableism, sexism, misogyny. Because like the tropes that exist in that time period very frequently can get explained away as it's just make believe. And for some people, that can be really difficult to deal with. But if you're at a session 0 with 5 players and a GM, and everyone's really excited about like this whole like let's use an example like a bastard child storyline for like a monarchy or something. And for some reason that just hits you really wrong, but everybody else at the table is super enthusiastic about it. It can be very difficult to speak up. One of the ways that I've tried to address that, because you don't want to have that player have to confront that or have to internalize that hurt if it is hurting them or triggering them, is an anonymous content survey. And I was lucky enough to work with an organization called the Hero Initiative a few years ago. And they built this really comprehensive content survey that gets filled out anonymously after session 0. And what that enables all the players to do is to go through and basically it starts with, if this campaign were a movie, what would its rating be? All eight, G, PG, PG-13, R, NC-17. And so that gives you sort of like a basic litmus test. But then it'll dive into specific topics like, are you okay with emotional abuse? Are you from an RP setting? Are you okay with that in context of NPCs? Are you okay with it in context of players? Do you want other players, are you okay with them doing that with each other? And it just goes down that line. I have found that to be an incredibly useful tool for me as a GM, because I have had players fill out that survey and I have no idea who they are. That's the entire point. Where I have gotten messages back on this survey where a respondent has said, I know we talked about this at session 0. I cannot do that. Please don't put it in the game. And if I didn't have that survey in place, if I didn't have a way for them to safely and anonymously and comfortably express to me, this is not something I can do or I'm comfortable with, I would have unknowingly been putting my players, and in some cases my friends, in a situation where they were having to process or internalize trauma. And so for me, that's been a great 1-2 combo. Do a session 0, everyone can chat, everyone can have a good time, and then give everyone a safe space to express, this is something I'm not comfortable with. For me, that's been the best combination of tools. There are a lot of other tools and methodology out there. For me at my table, that's what we rely on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And I had not considered an anonymous thing until just now, which is a really good idea.
I'm loving that.
Absolutely.
The other thing I'll add on to that is when you're in games, right? If you've done all the preparation, if you've spoken to people, if you've also, gotten a gist from just having sessions before of what people are and aren't comfortable with. But sometimes maybe a situation can arise in the middle of a game of just something you didn't think about as a GM, or a player brought something up that they didn't think about, that can make someone else genuinely super uncomfortable, right? For a whole host of reasons. Both as a player, as a GM, I would say, but especially as a GM, you have to be very adept in, especially like more heavy role-playing times, in reading the room and trying to read people and seeing if they're, if they're okay with what's happening or if they're into it or not. Because the GM especially has the most power to change that situation drastically as soon as possible. Players also have a lot of power in that respect, where if you recognize that as a player, you can also try to do something about it, right? But just making an effort to develop that skill of just being in tune with how people are sort of reacting or not reacting in a situation, I think is very, very important.
I think as other players, though, at the same table, though, you could also read the room. And if you think someone's going out, break the narrative. I know that this was a popular show and it was clear the character was trying to get out of it. But, if you're a player and you know that this person's uncomfortable and the DM's not responding for whatever reason, break character, break the, no, you need to stop, stand up for these things. Mm-hmm. If you read something the DM is not, for whatever reason, stop it. This is a game. It's a game. It's mm-hmm. any other game. Like if I'm playing a game of Settlers of Catan and the way that one of the players at the table is jiding another player, if I don't like that, I'm going to tell them to stop or this thing's done.
They call the sheep.
Yeah. Too much
Now,
sheep. I hate
on
it.
these this is same or on the other side of that coin, um, again, speaking as someone who's dealt with a lot of trauma, um, if you see something and you want to speak out, but you can't for whatever reason, that's not a mark against you.
Oh no, absolutely
Um,
not. Yeah,
as much as
I agree.
yes, if you can to try and stick up for your fellow players or the GM, I've seen just as many situations where player has tried to railroad this story into something that GM was not comfortable with. Um, and with really strong personalities, it can be hard to tell them no, especially in a make believe world where they can go, hey, it's not really real. You know, I'm just, this is what my character would do. Um, One of the things I think you might have mentioned it in the chat, but I've seen it before. Is what's called the X card. It's sometimes called that. There's a lot of different things, but it's basically the best example I know of is if you're adding a physical table, which none of us are right now because
None of us should be right now.
yeah, because we're all practicing social distancing, and that would be a really big table. Um, but visually, it makes it's easiest to visualize. Everyone is given just either a playing card or a piece of cardstock with an X on it. And anytime a situation shows up where someone at the table is just not feeling it, they don't want to deal with this, they toss the X card out. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to place as stops, and you find a way to get out of that situation right there. It could mean retconning what had happened to avoid it. It could be just, and that happened, and we're done with it, and moving on. Whatever the table decides is the best to move forward. Um, Again, to give you guys an example from one of my tables, we had a situation where one of the players was a warlock. Their patron was evil. We call him the Dark Lord. Like, he was just a bad guy. And due to my experience, not only having bad people in my life, but as an actor, I'm 6'4", very deep voice, and I had a beard when I was a freshman in high school. I played exclusively bad guys. So I'm very good at being a bad guy. One of the things that this guy was doing to get his to get the player to kind of repledge loyalty was forcing him to torture another character, which is a thing that happens. It's a horrible thing, and it was being done because this guy is supposed to be the evilest of evil. And when it got to the player, we're role playing this out, and he's like, "Okay, I take my dagger." And I messaged him immediately because it's all roll 20. And I said, hey, listen, you don't have to describe anything. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not supposed to be a fun encounter. It's supposed to make him look really bad and maybe give your character a chance to form an opinion on their patron and maybe have a character growth moment. So what we did right then was just like, okay, I torture the good character. I go, okay, it's done. It was bad. Next.
Yeah. I mean, that's really all that's needed. You know, the fade to black on, you know, certain, if you will, romance scenes. You don't need to tell about, you know, what's going on. You just, yes, this happened. On we go, sort of idea.
Another thing to think about too, especially because this topic came up from a broadcast, right? Mm-hmm. The popularization of broadcasting and doing these kind of games is entertainment, right? Whenever you're, even if it's just a private game online or at a physical table, right? In those cases, your audience, if you think about it that way, are yourselves, right? You only ever have to think about the people that are there. Yep. Whenever you make the decision to broadcast something, that changes potentially significantly, right? Because you are now airing all this out in front of literally anyone who decides to tune into it. And so I think it would be important in that case as well, especially if you know from the beginning that you're going to do that. to sort of sit everyone down as, characters might make their backstories, right? Or the GM is starting to create their story arcs, right? Of just keeping in mind that anyone with any issue themselves could be watching this in the hopes of being entertained by it. And so trying to just sort of keep that in mind as you come up with the way certain things might happen or the way you do things both as a character and as a storyteller.
Yeah, I think just to carry off of that, one of the things that I've learned as a storyteller is, and I really have J.R.R. Tolkien to thank for this particular through line, problematic as he was from time to time, is that the world that we live in is already full of dark and evil and unpalatable things. If you are trying to play heroes, you don't have to reflect that darkness. You don't have to partake in it. And specifically with broadcast, I think one of the things that has created this trap is engagement numbers are so important to monetization on broadcast channels that having that X card, that eject button, can be difficult to implement because in the back of your mind you're always thinking, if we stop playing right now, how many viewers are we going to lose? And then it's going to hit your pocket. And so I think there has to be someone, either a producer or the dungeon master, or like a player focused on the sensitivity angle. There has to be somebody in charge of that who
Yeah.
can look past those potential roadblocks to implementing some of those safety tools. Because if you're sitting there going, well, this will be over soon and it won't be a problem, you never know where that story is going to go. You don't know how long that encounter is going to last. And if you're sitting there thinking, it'll be done soon, it's not that big a deal, you're missing the opportunity to like create that heroic moment, even for yourself, like out of game saying no, stop, this isn't okay. That's a moment of heroism, to me at least, and I actively encourage my players to do that. Thankfully, we've only ever run into that in years. We've only ever run into that situation once at a table, but I have been on broadcasts as a guest, where somebody has said, I need to take a walk. That was really intense. And we had to pause. And when we came back, sure enough, your viewer numbers are significantly lower, but it was still the right thing to do. And the monetization on the broadcast side, I think really, in this particular case, I know that was one of the factors. And that's one of the pitfalls of deciding to do a show as opposed to just playing a game with your friends.
Well, and along that point, and I'm gonna bring this up over and over again, just because it, for me personally, it's a big deal. Um, Stepping up and speaking, even when it's your character that is going in the place that you don't want it to do, is hard. Is
Yes.
incredibly hard, especially if you've known all the people at the table for a while, and maybe it's even something that was okay 6 months ago, and then now it isn't. Nothing is ever always okay or always not okay when it comes to these. Well, maybe always not okay, but it can you can handle some things some days and then not other days. So having someone who has, before the game goes live, before you roll your first dice, having someone whose kind of job it is to be the advocate for that can take a lot of pressure off of everyone. Simply, and even the person doing it, because it's no longer, I'm going to speak up for myself because I can't handle it. It turns into, no, this is literally my job here is to do this. So I don't have to feel like I'm imposing my own limitations, which is something with people with disabilities have to deal with all the time. Is when we ask for accommodations and the things like that, a lot of the time we are made to feel that we are somehow ruining everyone else's experiences because they have to somehow cater to us, which isn't true, but that's how our that's what we've been told quite a few times, and that's how our brains interpret all the times we haven't been told. So even just having the person there that's their job and empowering them in that particular way can make it a lot easier for everyone. Because maybe in the moment it didn't stop because someone couldn't. But after the game, they can go, or maybe during the game, they can just whisper the person that it is their job, so that person doesn't have to interrupt the game and feel like they're the center of attention. They can simply talk to someone, and then the person that already is supposed to do that can interject and do the accepted the thing, as opposed to someone kind of. I think I'm rambling, but the idea of throwing out an X card or something can feel like you're breaking things.
I think you're right with the broadcaster's another layer, and I think the producer, there has to be one. There has to be somebody whose primary responsibility is to read the table and be that confidant. Where if you don't want to talk to the dungeon master, perhaps the dungeon master's in the character, they're lost in the character. But somebody outside should be sitting there from a broadcast standpoint saying, no, okay, we need to not do that and move on. Absolutely.
Yeah. Does anybody here listen to the podcast Dungeons and Daddies?
I
from the
of it, but
okay.
I haven't heard it.
Okay, so high level, basically, it's 4 dads from our world get teleported to the Forgotten Realms, and they have to find their lost sons. And I won't give away sort of where that eventually leads to, but the long and short of it is there was a very recent episode where they actually so during their broadcast, there was no real issue, nobody stopped or anything. But when they put out the recording on all the podcast networks, the episode they had essentially a rider in front of the episode saying, "Hey, look, this is a content warning. We didn't mean to go to this place because none of us have this personal experience. But just so you know, as a content warning, there are some aspects of emotional abuse and manipulation in this episode. If that's something that you're not comfortable with, here's the timestamps you need to skip, and you won't lose any of the story. It's not plot related. It's not necessary for the plot, but it did make sense for the character in the moment." And I thought that was a really strong move on their part, in that they acknowledged it. They acknowledged that it's not integral to the plot to have that be a part of it. But if you want to see the full development of a character, because it was one of those instances where they were basically trying to show you that the bad guy was a bad guy.
Yeah.
Exactly like that torture scene you were talking about. But the way that they put that publication out there, I thought was handled very intelligently, is that they acknowledged it, they assessed it, and they gave listeners an opportunity to decide for themselves, is this something I'm going to listen to or not? And I thought that was a very strong move on their part. And Freddie Wong and Matt Arnold, the producers of the show, I think deserve a lot of praise for the way they handled it.
Yeah. Elias and I both act as producers on the Zelda RPG I run for the Zelda universe. And one of the things I do when I run an RPG is I actually develop each one of the player characters' backstories with them, generally through email. Even before all this, I like email. So that every character has the ability to give their entire backstory if they want, or to have secrets that we can reveal over the game, or never just show up at all. Like a certain Goron who never did anything involving his.
Hey, he's just happy to be here.
But one of the characters wrote into her backstory some abuse and some aspects that are very sensitive. And I've already had the conversation with Elias and our other producer, Alex, saying, by the way, when we get to a situation where it's possible her backstory is going to start coming up, I will be, before the episode gets forward during announcements, I'll be going, by the way, this is a content warning. I can't guarantee this is going to happen today because it depends on the player's choices. But there's a possibility we'll be dealing with some abuse, some surviving assault and the things like that. I just want to let you guys know that's a possibility. If you want us to skip this episode, that's fine. We always give a recap of the episode at the beginning and then the next one. You really won't miss much. And if you need to just stop watching for a while and could come back later, that's perfectly fine.
I think backstories are very, very important and should be done for these reasons. So you can see what the person wants to build off of and then verify with everyone else that, hey, is this something that's going to bother you? Something that we actually brought up in the Basic Adventuring web show that I did was, we had one of the characters using dead parents as his, driving force, his pathos, if you will. And the main character, well, her father died and had a triggering moment in a LARP based scenario. And that could have been avoided if, this was something that perhaps, like, you don't have to sit there and say, hey, here's my trauma. That's not the DM's business half the time. But it's like, this is what the person wants to do with. Are you okay with this? You don't have to say what you're not, but if you're not, then let me know now, because this will come up in the course of the story. And then that's not to say tell everyone else's backstory. I understand people like to hold that close to vest, but the concepts that are being used, I think, should be relayed to everyone. The survey, I think, is an outstanding way of dealing with that sort of thing. I'd never heard of that either. I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide copies of that to folks as well.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Is there a link or anything you could post into chat just so people that are watching?
Yeah, I think they do have one just hosted on their website. Let me go ahead and pull it up, and I'll throw a link to that copy in chat so folks can use it.
Again, as much as I'm having a blast just to talking to the rest of you guys, obviously we have people watching as well, and I think by far that's one of the best tools I've heard thus far.
Yeah.
I do want to mention another aspect. Like, we've talked basically everything about avoid, stop, everything like that. I don't want to say that you can't use role-playing games to explore really dark topics. If that's what you would like to do. I will say it's not something you should try to do lightly, but if you want to kind of have a character explore, surviving abuse and how to get on with their life after it, it's a really, really hard topic to deal with. And it's not like 90% of the movies or TV shows you've seen where after a 30-minute episode, or maybe it's a whole story arc where it lasts for a season. It's not how it really works. As a survivor of abuse, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. But as with any form of art, you can use a role-playing game to really kind of show the realities of it without it being too triggering. If you do it, if you prepare for it, if you make sure everyone is okay with it, and you approach it from a very mature and methodical, I guess, standpoint. Like I said, it's not something I would recommend everyone to do. But I also don't want to say that RPGs are not the place to deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a game. It's not therapy. Mm-hmm. It can be helpful, and I know that some people do use it in conjunction with therapies. Like I myself, I play in I'm an occasional guest on a broadcast game where their whole thing is they play disabled characters, because in a magical world, what is disability? So you can have people who are missing limbs. You just have like these ghost limbs made out of magic. You can have people who have neuroatypical statuses and stuff still be powerful spellcasters, and like there's rules around it. For me, I think the biggest thing I've taken away from the situations I've been in, and unfortunately I've been in some bad ones, and I know for a fact I've created some bad ones, is this is where allyship is important, and own your mistakes. I can give just like a very brief example. I was running a game where a topic of assault came up, and I had a player basically push the eject button, and another player asked, like, "Can you tell us why this is a thing?" And I looked at player A and I said, "Is this something you're comfortable talking about?" And player A kind of gave me a, "Yeah, I mean, I can provide context." And player B said, "Yeah, please tell us about it." And so theoretically and technically, in that moment, player A consented to telling this story. But because they hesitated, it was my responsibility as the GM to say, "You know what, maybe we don't have to deal with this." And instead, I went, "Well, they said yes, so that means yes." And afterwards, they came to me and said, "I felt really exposed. I felt really on the spot," and they left the game. And if I had been a little more attentive, I could have prevented that. And so I think a big part of this is, when there are failures, and there will be failures, it's important to own them and learn from them.
That was what was most disappointing me about the thing in that we were talking about without naming names, was the lack of accountability after the fact.
Yep.
And that was a very common theme I saw with everyone that was talking about it, was the fact that, yeah, it happened, and a lot of people said, well, if the person had just said, "I just screwed up and apologized," it would have been different, but
Yeah.
they gave excuses.
People with a lack of accountability are at the top of my list of the people I can't stand. We're
So
humans.
that's why you hate me.
I do. It's true. We're humans. We do make mistakes, and I think for most people that they're innocent mistakes. But if you're not willing to wear them, then that just tells me that you're okay with what you did, and that's where I have my problems with people who don't.
And I will keep harping on this because of my personal issues. Just like Michael said, just because someone has said they're okay, or they didn't speak up, doesn't mean it's okay. Being put on the spot, even if it's just for people, being put on this spot where you're the person that gets to decide if this thing happens or not, isn't tense. And something that a lot of people don't realize, there's a thing in medicine called comorbidity, which is basically when two different diseases or things are affecting the same person and tend to kind of piggyback on each other. In mental health, depression and anxiety are comorbidity factors in literally every single disability there is. Mental disabilities, physical disabilities, you are unbelievably more likely to have depression or anxiety, or both, if you have anything else that affects you. And one of the things people don't think about of both anxiety and depression is they can make you very compliant, simply because you want out of this situation. From an anxiety standpoint, you will do whatever it takes to get out of these situations. So if that means letting it go so that you no longer have to be this is the center of attention, you may say yes when you mean no. On the other side, depression makes you not feel anything. And so you may say yes when you want to say no. So this is simply because nothing.
Peer pressure.
You can't work up the courage to say anything. So it makes it even more important to, especially if you do have touchy situations after the game is over, to check in with people. I after I did all my reading on this incident, I actually let my players know, hey, but by the way, the Roll to 20 chat when we're live, that is never shown to the audience. Like, they just see your faces or your pictures. So if you need to say something to me or the other players, anything you say there is confidential between us. And if you type /w space, it will give you a list of players. Click on the person you want to, and you can send them a message only to them. So if you want to tell me something and you don't want to be singled out, use that. I will never ask in the moment. I will never ask for an explanation. I will never ask you to justify it. If you say, "Hey, this needs to stop," it ends, and you won't be called out. If someone asks me, it was my decision. I decided that I didn't want to do that, and I am the bad guy, because that's kind of my role as the dungeon master.
And on the flip side, I guess not necessarily the flip side, but it's also as a dungeon master and as a story writer, frankly, writing a world and writing an engagement that is in these high fantasy scenarios that just universally avoids these things. Like, why on earth does there have to be racism on Middle Earth? Why on earth does there have to be casual misogyny in, Taldore? Like, you can just choose not to include that. Like, it doesn't always have to be touchy feely, everybody's hugging all the time, because then there's no conflict. But like, the acquisition of power and wealth is usually motivation enough for your bad guys. You don't have to make them like burn down a puppy orphanage to get people to engage with your story.
Yeah, I just as a sort of general like rule, if I could just sum up like all of it, whether it's before the game or during the game or broadcasting, not broadcasting, I think it's just overall better to be safe than sorry in whatever form that takes.
Mhm.
And if y it's, I think, much less of an infraction to be more sorry, to be more safe, excuse me, than more sorry, right? Because then after the game, if everyone's fine with everything, then you can maybe add a little extra drama or whatever your intent was in the first place. But if not, and it ends up you made the right call, then that's a big hit. You avoid it.
Yeah, touchy subject in general.
Yeah.
I do remember. I can't even remember which system it was. But again, I was reading Reddit comments, which, depending on which Reddit you're in, can be really insightful or a dumpster for fire. And I saw
or both. Yeah.
But I did see one where they were talking about some system that I can't even remember what it was. But in the core rulebook or something, they actually have an entire section where they go, by the way, in our fantasy world, rape doesn't exist. Everyone in the entire world thinks that's such a heinous, disgusting thing, and no one in the history of the world has ever done it. So don't worry about dealing with it in your games. It's never happened. And if you want to add it to your games, don't.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible in our world.
Yeah, if you're using that as a mode, or if you want to include that sort of story beat, maybe reflect a little, because that's just not entertainment.
And there, again, I see again my own history of abuse and stuff like that. Because I've experienced it myself and I've seen it not directed at me. Like I worked in retail I worked in retail management for half a decade.
I am so sorry.
You see abuse. You see every single form of abuse in the service industry in general, and I mean every type. And I've seen it all. And it's helped me to kind of define my own management style back when I was in management, and it helped me realize what things are accepted that I personally won't accept in myself or in any of the businesses I've run. In that aspect, there's certain things that, like, I have a lot of my villains use abuse tactics because I'm very familiar with them, and everyone else is as well. If you've ever dealt with a school bully or anything like that, you know what they are. So as much as I will get rid of those things, if they're starting to trigger players, I think it's in most of the games I run, I think it's okay to have some abuse tactics, not like, you know, full on role playing horrible experiences, but it makes the characters just that little bit more hateable. And it gives the player characters a chance to grow, because anyone that's dealt with abuse knows that when you get through it, which you can do, and there are a lot of people out there that can help you to do that, it changes you as a person, and you grow and becoming a new person, getting through it, able to deal with things you couldn't before. On that same note, I won't do sex in any of my campaigns, even consensual stuff. That's just not what I did to do. I won't do sexual abuse and the things like that, because to me that's a line. That's a line that I won't cross. It gets too real and gets just too bad. Like, even I know people that have abused me, that have learned from what they did wrong and are now for friends of mine. Sexual assault is a whole different thing. Like, that's a truly evil, not to rank pain or anything like that, but yeah, like I said, I don't think all touchy subjects should be completely avoided. Just know your audience and know your own self, and talk, communicate.
And to maybe avoid like having this whole thing be kind of a downer. For me, I just like to consider why people like playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and like playing TTRPGs. It's because by and large, most of us want to save the day. That's why most of my players play. It's why most of my players are into the Harry Potters and Lord of the Rings and the Marvel Cinematic Universes and the DC Comics and stuff, is because there's a part of them that wants to do good and save. And I think if you lean into that aspect of your storytelling, it can be really rewarding as a storyteller, and then also as a player. And so I think if you focus on that aspect, you can sort of steer away from a lot of these pitfalls just by dint of focusing on the motivation to do good. And I think that's maybe a very clean way to just create a really open and safe environment for everyone.
And I think just as important is focusing on the good triumphing over the bad.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to add, you know, some of those things, someone that's been through abuse, being able to play a character that gets to vanquish the abuser can be really empowering and really positive the thing for them. So focus on your players are the good guys, and they're going to win. As much as a lot of people will argue, well, everyone always needs to have the chance of a failure. Yeah, but the whole point of the game is for them to succeed. So let's make it hard for them, but always fall back on the fact that you guys are going to get through this, and you're going to triumph.
Yeah, the thing I've always told that my game from the beginning is the whole point of this playing a tabletop game is that we are playing a game. The point is to have fun as a group together, right? So if at any point, for any reason, whatever it is, you're just not having fun, just let me know, and we'll change. We'll do what we need to do to get back on track, right? Because at the end of the day, that's why we have all decided to do what we're doing.
Yep.
Anyway, thank you so much for talking about this incredibly difficult topic. Thank you specifically, Michael. That resource is phenomenal.
Oh, it was my pleasure, really. It's been a lifesaver for me. I've learned a ton from it. I really have.
Obviously, anyone watching at home, either live on Twitch, or if you're watching this a little later on my YouTube channel, if you have ideas or questions about this, obviously to talking to other people is great. However, this is where I get to plug something I think is really important, which is if you have experienced abuse, or you're survivor of abuse or sexual assault or anything, even if you don't think it was that bad, which is a very common thing for abuse survivors, where this person had this is so much worse than me. Talking to someone is always a good thing. I'm not going to say every single person you to talk to is good. I've been through multiple therapists. You do have to find one that fits, and you don't have to go to the therapist if that's not your thing. But talk to someone you trust. Talk to someone that you trust their opinion, even if it's your local pastor or imam, or whatever it is, that you have a wise person that you trust and can talk to. It helps. It really does. And all the stuff we talked about here, if something in a game triggers you, that doesn't make it any less important because it was an imaginary game. I had a situation in one of my games that was really bad for me because it dealt with one of the players attempting to commit suicide, which I was committed to a psych ward for. I spoke with my therapist for 2 weeks only on that subject, because even though it was just a game, it can have real impacts on you. So please do not feel bad about reaching out into talking to someone. Really? Sorry, I hit a button and things changed on my screen. It 100% is worth it. And it doesn't make you any lesser of a person. In my personal opinion, it makes you stronger. So,
yeah.
With that really uplifting moment, if
I feel encouraged.
Yeah, if people want to find you, and maybe see more things that you do, where would they be able to find you? Let's start with Elias this time.
Well, a friend of mine, Classy Don, has a podcast called. No, I'm just kidding.
Feel free to plug everything, just like in the last session.
Yes, you can find me on the internet, Elias Thompson, everywhere. I do things on Twitch, normal social media, whatever. If you thought what I said, if you just want to hear my brain. I tend to do a lot of Twitch on various other places. As Jody mentioned, I do a lot of work with the Zelda Universe Twitch channel, one of which is a broadcast tabletop game using the Open Legend system, where basically Zelda D&D, where I play a Goron there that is very bomb happy and apparently has no interest in ever digging into his backstory.
You had your chance.
And I do stuff there too. I also co-host a show on another channel where my co-host and I drink and rate wines while playing Minecraft. So that is Winecraft Wednesday over on the Winecraft TV Twitch channel every Wednesday evening.
Can you give us a quick wine rec? Because I'm always looking for new vintages.
The last wine I just had was, so there's a brand of Apothic wines that most of the wines they make, they take the time to make good blends.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought they were always red blends, but I found in just my grocery store an Apothic white they had, which was a very curated white blend. It was pretty good if you like white wines. It was a good balance of sweet and dry.
We are getting into white wine season.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's it. I think I've said enough.
Okay. But Blair, I understand you might have some familiarity with the podcast format.
I've done the odd podcast, yeah. I got a couple, one more or less in mothballs right now. The Who Pod, which yourself and Elias has been on, and last week Aaliyah has been on, and Don as well. It's a community podcast. That's just one that's kind of, for us within an inner community. I do a audio drama in a genre that has been coined Nerd Noir, which I got to give credit to JP Rickath on that one. He came up with the idea, but it's a film noir kind of audio drama, if you will, serial that's heavily focused with geeky references. The main character constantly makes geeky references to things, and had one season. We're in the process of trying to build season 2 right now. With everyone in lockdown, though, some things have become a challenge. So we're going to try to get that out as soon as we possibly can. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be on Off Day Campaigns, which is a fairly new show. I talked about it earlier, cinematic RPG show. And that, if you go to Off Day Campaigns on Instagram, you'll find them. And for me, just specifically, I am Blair Beveridge. This thing everywhere. That's how you spell my name. IDGE instead of AGE for those that know how to spell the drink word. You can find me lots of places there.
And but by the way, the Nerd Noir is called Harley Human, right?
Harley Human. My apologies. Thank you. Yes, so that you can find everything to do with that at harleyhuman.com.
Definitely to check it out. I think I know most of the cast, at least tangentially. So they're awesome people. And then finally, Michael.
Sorry, I'm going to harleyhuman.com so I can check it out later.
It works so well. What an effective plug.
Hey, digital advertising works, guys. What can I say? I am Michael J. Gibson. You can find me. The best place to find me is on Twitter at YesThatMGibson, as in Yes That M Gibson over here. I talk about ethics, accessible design, and politics as relate to digital marketing, culture, and gaming. So there's a lot of focus on sort of broadcasting other people's stories and taking part in things like the TTRPG Safety Toolkit, Heroes Initiative, things like that. And also you see a lot of pictures of my dog, who is sort of adorable, and he's a Husky Shepherd mix, so if you like slightly wolfy looking dogs, you get to see a lot of him. He's pretty great. I am not currently guesting on any shows at the moment, just because all of my DMing is sort of taking up a lot of my time. But if anybody is interested in having me as a DM, I currently have 2 slots left available in my rotation. So if you've liked what I've said and you think that I might not make your life miserable as a player, hit me up and we'll see if we can build a world together. That'd be a lot of fun.
And as always, I am Trainer Jody. I'm Trainer Jody just about everywhere. I at the same time that Elias is doing his very entertaining Minecraft show, I have a campaign that I run. It's a 5th edition rule set in my own custom world, and I have a second. I do that on the 2nd and 4th every other Wednesday. It's just easier that way. And I have another campaign that I'm just finishing, the campaign Bible, that will go on alternating Wednesdays whenever that starts. So that stuff is on my Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/TrainerJody, the same place where you're watching this right now.
We planned that in advance to put our shows at the same time, the same day.
Definitely.
Definitely wanted to split our audience.
I think we actually started streaming within like a month of each other when we first started for forever ago.
It's a good way to ensure neither of you ever has to be a guest on the other show.
Funny thing,
it really is. Yeah.
I did get guest on Winecraft back when I didn't just stream on Wednesday nights.
Oh, so which one did come first?
I'm pretty sure you were Wednesdays before I was. I think I switched to Wednesdays when you were on hiatus.
Yeah, we take too long hiatuses. It's a problem.
And that was actually the last time I had a drink as well. So
I'm glad I could be your last.
Yeah, thank you. Now I drink exclusively root beer.
Oh, Sprecker's, good choice.
Sprecker's, amazing.
You're up in Wisconsin. Of course you're drinking Sprecker's. What am I saying? Yeah, of course. Why would you drink anything else?
No. Also, you can find me. The best place to contact me about anything is always to Twitter. That's what was doing all the beeping on my phone today. So yeah, if you want to contact me about one of the campaigns I run, the Zelda campaign I run every other Saturday on Zelda Universe. Twitter is the best place to find me. And everything I do on Twitch, I archive on my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Jody. And I also have a lot of other D&D related content. I have a show called D&D Deep Dive, where I go deep into mechanics and the design of classes and the things like that. I have a show that I started that's I haven't done an episode in like a month, called D&D Now, where I literally just talk about pre-written adventures and the things that you can buy and run and get playing now over the internet and everything like that. Just because I believe it's important to have people playing, especially in a situation where you can't get face to face with people. And then I also have Player Faves, which is a show where I create D&D character sheets that are Adventures League legal for various pop culture and video game characters. Like I've done Batman Beyond, Raiden from Mortal Kombat, the Green Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, like whatever it is that people suggest. I make the D&D characters for it because I'm a masochist. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. That's all for me today, and I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.
Hi, guys.
Bye.